When you're going into CRNA school, you go in as a newbie. Even though if you've had a lot of experience, you're going in as a newbie. And as long as you take that and you're humble and you're open to hearing feedback and you're asking for feedback, not just open to hearing it, but asking for feedback, you're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You're going to do great. Okay. So again, this can really be a positive if you express that willingness and openness to be a student again, excited to be a student again, to learn, to be a sponge, to soak it all in, to take direction, to learn from your preceptors. If you express that coming with your clinical background, you are going to be golden. You just have to make sure you're expressing the fact that that's what you're here for. Well, hello, future CRNA. Welcome to CRNA School Prep Academy podcast. If you're new to the show, welcome. I'm so excited you found us, and I'm so excited for your future. In today's show, we're actually going to talk about some myths or some commonly heard statements, I would say, out there on the internet, whether that be through your peers, your coworkers, your managers, even some CRNA influencers, which was mentioned inside of our community. So again, we're going to kind of talk about some statements that are commonly spread out there on the internet, and we're going to kind of break them down a little bit and discuss, whether there might be missing some of the truth. And sometimes it's just what I call projection. So we're going to kind of reveal what this is in just a moment. But yeah, I guess I want to start this whole episode with preferencing the fact that wherever you consume information, right, which is a lot of different places these days, just be very cautious and use, and this doesn't necessarily come from people with ill intentions. I also want to say that typically when people give advice or share their own experiences, it's not really meant to do harm, but sometimes it can. And especially if you take it in a way that feels like it's something that's going to hinder you or something that maybe now you're scared about, and it creates fear around, well, what if? And I want to reiterate the fact that everyone's experience going into CRNA school is going to be unique and different. And you cannot let someone else's experience affect how you think your experience is going to be. So that's like the key take home thing with today's episode. So I will save what I think is probably the two most controversial ones, and one that I actually want to get into a little bit because I think it could be very harmful if it's kind of taken the wrong way. We'll save that for the last few, okay? But the first one that I'm going to kind of cover today is you may have heard that, let's just say if you're older than 40 years old, the schools are not going to want you, you're not going to get into school. And again, this was gathered from our community. CRNA School Prep Academy has a private community where our students can come gather. We have program faculty, including myself in there, who kind of answer questions and just, provide support in the community. So again, this was something that I hear a lot from students who are older. And I don't think 40 is old. I mean, I hope 40 is not old. I'm getting there, you guys. But let's just say if you're fearful because all your peers or your classmates are like in their mid-20s or young 30s, and you're like, well, gosh, I'm 45. Like, they're never going to want me. I'm damaged goods. And they're going to think I'm unteachable and that I'm too set in my ways and all those other things, right? And you may have heard that. And let me just preference this by saying that, this just kind of goes to show that when you project your own fears onto someone else, it can tend to make them equally fear that what if that is true? The only person who can answer whether any of those things are true about you is you yourself, right? Are you unteachable? Are you damaged goods? Are you set in your ways? So ask yourself if you feel that any of those statements are actually true for you. And if your answer is like no, well, then the answer is no. The answer is not going to hinder you because it is not true to who you are. And that is something really key. And I want to reiterate again is that when you hear these quote unquote myths or statements from people who are kind of projecting almost like a judgment or a bias onto you, you have to really then assess like, well, it may be true for some, okay, but it's not true for me. Or you could be like, well, I think sometimes I might maybe I am leaning, because I actually had another student actually recently on the show, and he's not old, but he even said when he started in the ICU, he realized that he maybe was somewhat unteachable, that he would find himself getting kind of defensive and not really opening up to the possibility of that he could be wrong, right? He recognized that. It was incredible for him to recognize that. But it's okay because he still got in. By the way, he got into school, but he had to work on that. He had to reflect on that aspect of who he was and address it. And there's nothing, doesn't make you a bad person or incapable or undeserving. It just means we're all human, guys. And let's just face it, we all have flaws, and that's okay. But it's a matter of like facing that flaw and saying, okay, well, I can improve on that. Maybe I can be a little more closed off when it comes to taking advice from others who I see as like my, or under me, right? Maybe from a new nurse who shouldn't be giving me direction because I've been doing this for 10 years. Who are they to say I should do it this way? And maybe it wasn't meant to come across that way, but maybe you took it that way because you got defensive. So it's just like, why is that? Is there nothing you can learn because they're 10 years younger? I would say no. And the reality is, you guys, when you enter the clinical realm of practicing anesthesia, if you do enter school in your mid to late 40s or even 50s, I have some students who are in their mid 50s who go into CRNA school. The vast majority of people who will be giving you guidance and their feedback, right? I gotta say feedback instead of, critical feedback. They're going to be younger than you. And so you have to address if that's how you are, how you feel, if you have a problem with that, because it will be a problem. And typically the schools will sniff that out, usually during the interview process. Okay. So the reality is, if you are older and go back to CRNA school, you can do it 110%. If you want this and you are open to being teachable and taking feedback from others who will be younger than you, who maybe have less ICU nursing experience than you, but equally have more experience in the anesthesia field, you're going to be okay. If you feel like you're set in your ways, do you find yourself not wanting to step out of your normal routines? What happens if you get something that's completely out of what you're used to? Does it get you flustered, agitated, restless, anxious? And if that's the case, again, it's okay. Nothing wrong with you. That just means you're human. But then assess, why? Why does that make me feel so uncomfortable? And how can I try to change that mindset, that framework of being uncomfortable into embracing the challenge, into looking forward to doing something different and something out of my comfort zone so I can grow as a person, as a practitioner. So it's okay if you fall into daily routines and habits, but you have to assess whether you have. And if you have to assess, why does it make you feel so uncomfortable to be pushed out of that comfort zone? And so typically, if you've been an ICU nurse for 10, 15 years, I'm not saying this is a blanket statement, doesn't cover everyone, but just assess where you are in that, right? If you get thrown into something that you've never done before, or you get like, if you have a new way of being told to do something, does it completely throw you off? Or are you just like, absolutely not. Heck no, 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 no. And don't get me wrong, you guys, doing something different that's unsafe is complete no, right? I'm not saying that. I'm saying things that are safe, but just not the way you like to do them. There's a big difference. So just assess if that's where you're at and then work on it. And then you will be ready. You will be ready to enter CRNA school if you address those issues. Even young nurses can fall into this trap. It doesn't mean just because you're older means you necessarily have these traps because you're older. But I think the reason why people say the statement, a blanket statement out there on the internet, is because typically we are creatures of habit who we do tend to follow similar routines. And especially as we, over time, those routines become habits and they kind of get set in stone, right? And we all do it, I'm not any different, And so it's funny, I was actually just talking to, I precept, I'm a preceptor in the anesthesia world, and I have a lot of students, and I love working with students because they bring like a breath of fresh air into my clinical practice. I ask them questions, how they want to try something and do something. I kind of share my experiences, and in the process of sharing my experiences with them, I realized that I don't do certain things anymore because I learned that I didn't like the result, or I didn't like the way it made me feel, or I thought it was a little bit too risky, etc. But I realized in the pattern of, like, for example, we were talking about masking, right? Doing a mask case. And you need masking skills, right? And then as a student, I was one of my CRNAs had me mask all day, 4 different cases. I think it was about 4 to 5 hours of straight masking. My hand, I couldn't even hold my steering wheel driving home, and I had a massive SIBO headache. It's like I could taste sevoflurane. Like, it was so bad. Oh, the headache was unreal. That was not fun, but it was a really good experience for me as a student. But I kind of started reflecting back on an experience I had as a relatively new CRNA where I was, suggested to mask this case. It was going to be a quick case, IND of the shin. But the patient was younger, and I can't remember what exact age, teenager, right? But morbidly obese. All that being said, it was and this came from me being inexperienced and not, having the insight and kind of being told that this is how you should do this case and whatever. So I was like, okay. It was terrifying. It was, through violent stage 2 with no airway, and my hand was cringing around the mask trying to keep the good seal. They were heaving off the bed. It was one of those situations where I was like, I will never do that again, kind of situation. So I shared that because I like to share stories like that. And so I guess I just wanted to preference that. I think masking, and then again, we were getting ready to do this case, preference with the fact that I have to assess the body habitus, right? And how difficult the masking may be. And the more muscular, the more older the child, typically the more muscle mass you have and the more heaving and violent stage 2 you're going to go through masking. So all that being said, I found myself almost not wanting to do it that way because of my experience, but I equally was like, you know what? If you want to try it, and as long as it's safe, and again, we, after looking at the patient, assessing that the body habitus was such that the facial aspects of him were within range, right? Because again, you never opt into something that's not safe. But all that being said, I found myself being hesitant, just because of my previous experience, which was equally hindering my students' experience. So ultimately, we decided that I was going to let it be his call, right? But I had to talk that through and share why I was having hesitations about wanting to do it that way. So all that being said, I kind of went off on a tangent, but I guess I wanted to show you the fact that even me preaching to you, and I hate that I hope I don't preach to you, but again, I equally fall into kind of similar habits and routines from my experiences. And I think as an experienced seasoned ICU nurse, you do the same thing. And so I think it's just important to reflect on that. And again, that was one of the situations that made me actually reflect on, gosh, why am I getting so worked up about this? Why is it such a big deal to me? And then I reflected, I was like, oh, it's because of that one experience. And is it okay for me to pass that experience on to this student who's just trying to learn and grow? And I equally, like I said, as a student, had an entire mass day. And I did just fine. Those patients were fine. I didn't have a bad experience with that, but I got to do that. And so here I am almost hesitant to do something because I had one bad experience. And so I just want to highlight that. Okay. And so there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just assessing where that's coming from and then really truly assessing the new situation at hand, whether that's necessary. All right, so we'll move on. That was number 1. I kind of went off on quite a bit of tangents around that. But just being said, I had someone in my class, you guys, even back in 2012 when I started CRNA school, that was 52 years old, okay, when they graduated. So, age, it really is just a number. I mean, you have to ask yourself mentally whether you are wanting this, whether you are willing to be a student again, whether you are excited to change career paths. If you are, then go for it. Obviously, I always suggest run the numbers, assess how much debt you would take on. Do you have cash to pay for this? And how many working years do you have left? I mean, you should know when your target retirement date was. I also equally worked with a CRNA who retired at, I don't know if he was 67. He was in his late 60s. He retired in his late 60s, but he worked till he was 70, 71 as PRN locum, right? So he worked from there 3-4 years as a locum CRNA. Before they fully retired. And so again, just know what your timeline is and then do the math, run the numbers, and make sure it makes sense for you. But otherwise, don't hold yourself back. Age is just a number, okay? All right. The next question, similar, but kind of more on the nursing practice side of things, if you've been in nursing greater than 5 years, it decreases your chances of getting to school. So it kind of goes into maybe not an age thing, but just the fact that you've been set in your ways, that you're not moldable anymore, that you're not adaptable. And this equally came from Dr. Wilson, who responded to this question, but it really is one of those things where it just depends on how you approach this situation. If you've been at bedside for over 5 years, 10, 12 years, whatever it may be, it can really be a positive But it can also be a negative, kind of for like a lot of the similar reasons that I just highlighted in the last one as far as age goes. I will tell you right now, in my time being a preceptor, I've worked with a lot of students, different programs, and I've had students who, they come into the OR, they've been an ICU nurse for 15 years, and they're rock stars, right? They're from day one, they're very smooth. They're comfortable. They're good at IVs. They're good at all the physical tasks, all the physical skills they pick up pretty quick. They equally seem to be able to move pretty quickly with the OR. They seem to be able to kind of do that critical thinking very quickly, where some nurses who are maybe not as seasoned, nurses who maybe have a year or some, meet that minimum ICU requirement coming to the OR, they do tend to, in the beginning anyways, tend to be a little more less polished, I guess is a good way to put it, like in a nice way, like just a little more like forgetful, or just seem to get overwhelmed, have a hard time kind of seeing the big picture kind of thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what I will say is that the student who comes in with more experience, even though he tends to be, or she, could be he or she, tends to be a little more polished in the beginning, it's totally up to their mindset and their attitude, their personality, as far as how they advance, right? I have seen, despite this, I have seen nurses who have a lot of clinical background not be open to suggestions or open to change or very adaptable, because I think it's more along the lines of maybe they just think they know best, or maybe they just, again, kind of the same thing. Maybe they're just kind of set in what they want to do. Where the people who don't have that experience are really moldable. And then they tend to, where they were less polished in the beginning, they tend to kind of come up by their counterparts who have more experience and sometimes surpass them, but only because of that one thing, because their mindset's more open, because they're like, yeah, I'm a newbie. Just give me everything. I'm going to soak it up like a sponge. I know, yep, I'm humble. I don't think I know best. Just give me all your things and I'll take it, right? I'll take all that stuff in your brain, give it all to me. Where someone who comes in who's a little bit less open to that, they don't grow as quickly knowledge and clinical base wise, because they're a little more closed off. That is the only thing I see. And it doesn't happen all the time. Trust me. There have been plenty of people who are not like that, who flourish even from day one all the way through graduation day. I'm just simply stating the reality of what I have come to see in practice. And it's not very often, okay? But the few things I have seen, if I had to compare the pathways, that's kind of what I have seen. And I'm pretty sure that's why schools equally kind of look for that. So I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm simply saying this to just be acknowledging of where you're at mentally, mindset wise, when you're going into CRNA school. You go in as a newbie. Even though if you've had a lot of experience, you're going in as a newbie. And as long as you take that and you're humble and you're open to hearing feedback and you're asking for feedback, not just open to hearing it, but asking for feedback, you're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You're going to do great. Okay. So again, this can really be a positive if you express that willingness and openness to be a student again, excited to be a student again, to learn, to be a sponge, to soak it all in, to take direction, to learn from your preceptors. If you express that coming with your clinical background, you are going to be golden. You just have to make sure you're expressing the fact that that's what you're here for. The next thing that you will hear is that if you have kids, you will not be successful in CRNA school. It's funny because this can go either way, and here's why. It just depends on your support system, number one. Number two, I actually think parents, and I'm not criticizing non-parents, so please don't take it that way. I'm just saying that I didn't have kids in school. So if anything, I'm reflecting on my own personal self, right? Okay, so please don't take this personally. But I know how I was in school, and I know how I am now, and we have 3 kids now. I have a lot more direction in my life now that we have kids, mostly because I don't have as much free time, which sounds kind of counterintuitive, but here's how to kind of think about it. Have you ever had a really slow day in the ICU and you're like, and then you find yourself forgetting to do things, you're kind of getting behind, you're like, how? It's just so slow. How am I getting behind? How am I forgetting to do things? Where when you have really busy days and you're going on a good clip, you're like on top of it. Bam, bam, bam. You get your stuff done. You're like on it, right? I personally experienced that quite a bit when I was in ICU, and that's kind of how I can best describe being a parent. Is there is no time to screw around. It is all business, front to bottom, top start to finish, top to bottom of your day, you are business, right? You are like, what needs done today? You're more organized because you have to be, because if you're not, you just like, it's just complete chaos. I mean, it's usually kind of chaos anyways. The other thing too is equally that is I think you're more used to juggling and dealing with being adaptable in chaos, because most of your days are going to be filled with that. Unexpected things arise, or shifts in schedule, or dealing with random emotions and lash outs and outbursts and sicknesses and illnesses, and still toughing it through your day despite being sick. Like, there's no such thing as laying on the couch and taking a nap when you're sick. It's like, I got to cook dinner. I got to clean the house. I got to get their diaper changed. They're sick. I got to give them Tylenol. And then again, in the meantime, you're febrile, you're sweating. You're like, oh, I'm just going to get through this day. Like, you're fine. You're going to have to survive because you got other humans to take care of despite how you feel. It's kind of like you get like kind of gritty becoming a parent, because it's not about you anymore. It's about someone else. And so, and again, I'm speaking for myself, and please don't take this personally. I hope you don't. But I'm just saying, if you're a parent, dang it, you are more than capable because you're a parent. If you can parent, you could do CRNA school, 100%. So please do not feel like you're not going to be successful. It can be just the opposite. But that, back to my first point, is you need support. That's huge. I mean, if you try to do all the things and be the parent and commit to CRNA school, I mean, you're going to be left pretty empty. I'm just being quite honest with you. You need someone to step in there and do a good chunk of the parenting for you during those times where you can't, meaning picking up the kids from school, doing the grocery shopping, doing the cooking, doing the cleaning. So you can focus on school. You're not going to be able to do it all. Parenting in itself's a lot of work. So all the other daily tasks and chores are going to probably have to be deferred onto your significant other. They're going to have to smile through it the whole time and not make you feel bad or guilty about it. You have to have these conversations early that you are not, if you're typically the housekeeper, if you're the one making sure the house is all pretty and tidy and decorated and all the things, and grocery shopping and organizing the kids' schedules and planning all the things, like, you're going to have a real heart-to-heart life conversation and say, here's all the things I do on a monthly basis. What do you want? Because you're going to take probably half of this off my plate, because that time now has to be put into schoolwork. So that's just the reality of it is, while I think you're really good at juggling and doing a lot of things and really kind of having grit to get through, I think you have to be realistic with, you are human, and you also equally can't kill yourself, and you will if you try to do it all. But you guys, that being said, I know people who enter CRNA school as single parents. I don't know how, but I equally know they have like either a nanny, they have other family or friends who help out and support, right? You have to have support, and you have to be realistic with your significant other on what the expectations are going to be, that it's not going to be the same. It's temporary, but it's not going to be the same. You're going to have to figure out how to multitask a little bit more, even though I'm not a fan of multitasking in the sense that, like, I mean, I do it. Don't get me wrong, I do it. But if you truly need to be dedicated to learning, multitasking is a really bad way to learn. You can never, think about it, you can never truly do two things at once and do them each incredibly well. If you want to do something incredibly well, you got to put all your laser focus into that one thing. Again, and so I'm not saying multitasking is bad, but if that's all you're doing is multitasking, you're probably going to struggle in school. You have to really dedicate strict time zones, like block off times in your schedule where it's just school. That's it. Not laundry and school, just school, right? So that's my recommendation. I'm not saying don't listen to your notes while you're folding laundry. By all means, do it, but make sure you're still dedicating space to where all you're doing is schoolwork and not trying to equally cook dinner at the same time. Obviously you have to do to get through certain days, but just make it a priority to do that. So that's what I have to say about being a parent in CRNA school. I had so much free time when I was in CRNA school and I didn't have any kids. I had a dog. I played Candy Crush for like an hour when I got home from clinical. That's free time. I still managed to get really great grades. Don't get me wrong, my days were long, they were stressful, and I spent a lot of my weekends studying, but I had the freedom to do that, and I didn't have to feel guilty about having kids to want to play with. And so I really feel for you parents out there who are going to CRNA school. It is incredibly hard. What you're getting ready to do is incredibly hard, and I have to say, it's going to be heartbreaking. And I just want to give you a big virtual hug right now, because I literally, I get it. Like, I feel guilty sometimes when I work and our kids are like, oh, play with me. And you're like, I want to play with you, but like, I have to equally work. You want Christmas toys? Okay, well, I got to work. So you want to you're doing this for your kids too. So remember that your family, not just your kids, your family, your significant other, this is all like hands on deck. You're doing this for your entire family, your life, right? You're going to have a better work-life balance. You're going to make more income. You're going to have more flexibility when you're done with school. You're not going to have to work weekends, nights, holidays, right? So you are doing this for a better future with your family. So I think you have to be open and remind your kids, and depending on their age, get them involved. Let them help you. Have them quiz you. Make them feel a part of your journey. It's going to be a lot more rewarding. And then say, hey, and mommy or daddy, when we're done with school, we're going to go to Disney and we're going to celebrate, because now you're going to have the money to do that, right? And the time. So kind of put them in it with you and let them know at the end there's going to be a big reward. It'll make, the sacrifices not seem as hurtful. But yeah, and don't get me wrong, CRNA school's hard regardless whether you have kids. I equally have heard students who literally have no support system, right? Who they don't have a significant other and they're struggling financially. I was incredibly grateful that I had a spouse who was working. I could be on this health insurance. It's not like, he made enough to pay our rent. We were still taking out loans for like living expenses and things like that, but it was enough to pay our rent, which I was incredibly grateful just to have that income. So it can be incredibly financially stressful when you're literally on your own. You have no significant other to help support you financially. So there are always positives and negatives to every situation. Equally, kids are expensive. So it's like, it's more of a financial burden as well to have kids, but it is possible. You can do it. You just got to plan for it. And I know you're good at planning because every parent's good at planning. You kind of have to be. So, all right, that's what I have to say about that. Okay. Next one is, and again, this one, I actually laughed at this. I was like, what? But I want to point out some things about this. This isn't really about school, but people say the market is saturated with CRNAs, like with FNPs, family nurse practitioners. I had to laugh at that because I was like, what? And I had to dig in a little bit because I was like, I can't believe that you actually heard this from a CRNA. And here's what I want to preference. If you ever hear something like this that doesn't come directly from an actual CRNA, run. Like, that is not advice that you should take to heart, because unless you're in this profession and based on your physical personal experience that you cannot find a job, you have no right to comment on it. I would never comment on an FNP job. I'm saying, you would never become an FNP. You can't find a job. I'm not an FNP. Ask one of them, please. I don't know. Some may struggle, some may not. I don't know. Get some perspective from people who are actually in the weeds doing it, right? So after investigating, it was funny, both me and Dr. Wilson were like, that's completely false. Like, that is not true. Oh my gosh, you guys, our hospital systems are hurting so bad for CRNAs right now. It's just insane. Being scouted. I've been in this career path for 8 years now. And don't get me wrong, I've always had people scouting, right? And being reached out to. But in the last couple of years, it's like taken up a notch. And in fact, again, I just got done working a locum position because it was such a great hourly rate that I just felt like I couldn't pass it up. And that's like everywhere right now. Hospitals are competing, trying to essentially steal staff. So again, it's not oversaturated. And it's not going to be for a very long time, because hospitals, at least from my experience, they're all expanding. They're all adding OR suites. They're all expanding their services for the most part. They're just growing, and yet we're not growing at the same pace that they're expanding. I want to say we have 14 ORs, and the CRNAs that I work with say, I think it was about 10, 15 years ago, they only had like 6. So in like a decade or a little over a decade, they've more than doubled, and they're adding more ORs still to this day. So maybe it was not even a decade ago. It might have been like 8 years ago or 6 years ago. Anyways, they've more than doubled in the last decade. So yeah, definitely not a shortage. And then after investigating, it was a charge nurse who said this statement. And so, think about it. Yeah, they're saturated. You want to go to CRNA school, you'll never find a job. Stay here and work in my ICU, please. By the way, I have overtime. You want to pick it up? So take consideration who you're taking advice from, or who you're taking this kind of, and don't let that deter you from doing what you want to do. Obviously assess your area, shadow a CRNA, ask them like, hey, what's the job market like around here? They'll tell you. Equally, again, why shadow, you guys. You have to shadow. Can I say that enough? Please shadow. If you don't shadow, you should shadow. Shadow a CRNA more than once, and then get to know them. They end up being good references. and just giving you some insight into this career path. Really, really invaluable experience. So shadow the CRNA and ask them themselves. And then you can make that judgment call whether they're the market in your area is saturated or not. And I've never heard of such a thing. Hey, future CRNA, just another daily dose of inspiration along your CRNA journey. Today, I'm sharing one of our community members' success story. Congratulations, Amanda, on your CRNA success. This is Amanda's story. Amanda had 1 year and 3 months of ICU experience, 2 years as a nurse in the PCU first, charge and preceptor, and overall undergrad GPA of a 3.75 with a science GPA of a 3.5. She took a grad level advanced pathophysiology and a biochemistry online before submitting applications. She did not take the GRE and purposely applied to the schools that did not require it. In total, she applied to 5 schools. She interviewed at 2 and got accepted at both those schools. However, she was waitlisted first at 1 and then pulled off the waitlist just 4 days later. She didn't receive an interview offer at 2 of the schools and is still waiting to hear from the 5th school. However, she has already accepted her spot. It is a brand new program and she will be in the inaugural class. So congratulations, Amanda. I'm so excited for you. Other things about Amanda's experience in her journey is that she invested in personal statement critique. She said that was a game changer. And she also had her resume critiqued. And she did 2 mock interviews, both of which were so helpful. She also said she watched all of the recorded mock interviews, utilized a 5-day interview challenge that we have in the Academy, the interview question bank, and so many more resources on CSPA. She's so nervous, but super excited for her new journey. Yay! Thank you so much for sharing your experience. Some big takeaways for me, you guys, is that Amanda, not only did she invest in things like a personal statement review, a resume review, and 101 mock interviews, she also took grad level pathophysiology and she took a biochem course to kind of refresh her sciences. So I really feel like a lot of those things are great boosters for your overall application. And the interview is so critical and so important. So the 2 mock interviews, kudos to you for doing that. I also love how Amanda really deep dived into all the resources we had in the Academy. So excited for your future. Make sure you stay in touch and keep me posted. I'm rooting for you all the way to graduation day. Let's get back into the show. So next one is programs won't take PICU nurses. Now for PICU NICU, I know I've said it on the show before, but you just have to know what and even ER, this is kind of a blanket statement, even for ER nurses, because you just have to know what you're walking into. You have to know what your schools accept. And you have to know when they say individual basis, that essentially means it's not preferred. There's not preferred, but we'll consider. That's what it should say. Okay, because that's what it means. Individual basis means it's not preferred, but we will consider. So when you take into account these schools are getting, typically for every 1 seat, they're getting about 6 applications. That's the average, 4 to 6 applications for 1 seat. So about 25 or less % odds of getting that 1 seat, right? When you consider that's kind of what we're at these days with the odds, if they have 6 people for 1 spot, and out of those 6 people, 4 of them have really preferred strong ICU experience, and 2 of them have what they don't really prefer but may consider, why would they consider it, right? I mean, so that's just kind of the perspective I want to give you. Please, I think PICUs, I'm a ped CRNA. I love kids, and I think if you're a NICU, PICU nurse at heart, and I equally think PICU nurses, holy heck, you see a wide range of ages. Very strong, in my opinion, ICU experience. I even worked with a CRNA who was a PICU nurse, and she even said one of her strengths was she knew all the weight-based dosing because she was so accustomed to it as an ICU nurse. So it's a strength, right? And the fact that you see such a wide age range, it's funny. I had obviously been an adult CRNA for the vast majority of my career until I went to pediatrics. And, in one day, I could have a 16-month-old and then an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old, like massively different vital signs, hemodynamics, fluid management. drug metabolism. I mean, you name it, it's vastly different. So you have to be on your toes and you have to think. It's a very, I used to think adults were like very mindful, but oh my gosh, pediatrics is even more so. I mean, it's just so different physiology between the two age ranges that it really keeps you on your toes. And so as a PICU nurse, you similarly do that, which I think is a big strength. And you're very adaptable for that. But that being said, if a program says on an individual basis for PICU experience or NICU experience, you have to take that to heart and understand that if you're only applying to this one school, this is your top school, this is where you want to be there no matter what, consider getting experience that they do prefer versus they'll consider, right? Don't just do the considered experience, do the one they want, which may be in the adult ICU. And I'm not saying don't try. If you're like, but I've been a PICU nurse for 2 years now. I have everything else I need to apply. But I'm just saying, if you don't get in, don't say, oh, I'm not good enough. I'll never be able to do this. Go get adult experience and come back. That would be my suggestion. But I've had plenty of people who are like, I'm just going to give it my best shot. And by all means, do, please. I'm not discouraging you from applying. My gosh, please don't. Please don't take it that way. But just know that if you don't succeed, that's something to consider, right? That being said, if they still interview you, right? If they still interview you, maybe they have 4 applications for 1 seat. And out of those 4 applications, they give 3 of them an interview, right? Or 2 of them an interview, and you get to be that number 2 person. Or, typically, if you get asked for an interview, you've almost increased your odds at getting in to about 40 to 50%. They typically interview more than double what they have room for. So if you get an interview, your odds have just like doubled, essentially, from the standard application. All that being said, that's your time to shine. If you do a really good interview prep and you're prepared both for pediatric questions and adult questions, and I think that where a lot of people go wrong is they think, oh, they're going to ask me all these peds questions. Not necessarily. They might quiz you on adult physiology, so you have to make sure you're strong, even though you typically deal a lot with little baby physiology. So again, think about that. If you rock your interview, more power to you. Chances are you're still going to get in. So please don't be discouraged. Just know that that's what that means. And so again, it's not that they won't take it. If they say they take it, they'll take it. Again, some schools will say on an individual basis. Some will just say, yeah, we take PICU. If they say, yeah, we take PICU, if they list it as one of their units they take, well, then no worries at all. Go for it. But still know your adult physiology for the interview process. If they say we take it, but on an individual basis, know that you should, if you give it a shot and you don't get in, to get adult experience and come back, or maybe brush up on your adult physiology for the interview better next time, right? Or if you don't even get an interview, well, then yeah, get adult experience and come back. All right. So again, some of the other answers to that, and again, this is by Dr. Wilson, that, some won't, but a number of them will. It used to be because PICU nurses didn't have high board passing rates, but that's been changing recently. So when they say they make judgment calls on things like ER and NICU experience, things like that, they really are looking at statistics. They are looking at, out of all the 3,000 students who graduate every year, where did they come from? What was their background and what was their board passing rate overall in the big picture? They look at that. And so that's where they get these yes and no's to certain backgrounds, because they literally ultimately see what's the success rate. And lately the PICU nurses have been killing it, so keep killing it. And so a lot of schools have been now opening up to allowing PICU nurses in their program. A lot of schools will say yes to PICU and no to NICU. So just consider that, because NICU, the neonatal ICU, you guys, and I hope you don't, not neuro, neonatal ICU is such a niche form of ICU nursing. I mean, it's such a small realm of ICU nursing. So again, I think they just worry that your experience is such a narrow experience, where PICU, they know, is a little more variety, right? You're going to have, again, a baby and maybe an older teenager, which is practically like adult physiology at that point. So, and we had someone say, hey, I'm a PICU nurse and I just got in. Woo! Okay. So see, okay. So hopefully you don't feel like it's over for you. Definitely is not. Next one is that you can't get in with 1 year of ICU experience. That is 100% not true. So many of our students, again, have gotten in with barely meeting the minimum 1 year ICU experience. In fact, we had a student who I was almost hesitant to say go for it, because I was like, oh, that's really not a lot. She applied. There was such a big delay from when the application cycle was closing to when they interviewed and got in, that by the time she actually would start the program, she actually would have over a year of experience. But when she applied, she barely had 6 months. So I was like, I don't know. I think when she interviewed, she only had not a year. She did not have a year of the time of interview. But she got in, and literally she had teed up everything else in her application. She rocked her interview. It can't happen. Equally, my good friend of mine, who's an amazing CRNA, she does a lot of regional, and she instructs and she teaches really well. She was like gung-ho. I mean, she was a 4.0 student. Got right into the ICU. She graduated early from college. I mean, she was just always gung-ho. And she got into a program who typically wouldn't have accepted someone like her with only 6 months of ICU experience. Now, obviously, she had to sign a waiver that she stayed full-time in the ICU up until the program started, so she'd have that year. And it's similarly, schools are not going to budge on that. You will have to have that year. So they will know that, meaning if they like you and you do a really, really good job and they really like you, they'll look and say, well, you don't really meet that year requirement, but you have to stay full-time as contingent on your actual admission. Meaning if you were to leave that ICU, you would forfeit your seat. They do want you to meet that year requirement by the time you start the program. But again, think about it. A lot of these programs, you guys, it's 6 to 9 months prior to starting their programs. So that's why, most candidates say they have 3 years. They may have interviewed around year 2, and then by the time they started, they practically had 3 years. That was at least my experience anyways. I got in when I had about 2 years experience. By the time I started, I had almost 3 years of ICU experience when I started the program because of the delay. I interviewed in October and I started in June of the following year. Next is the medical ICU is unwanted. Well, if that's the case, I'm in trouble because I was a medical ICU nurse. Now, there's so much out there that says you have to be a CV ICU nurse. That's just the best. And I have no idea. I'm not saying it's a great experience. Don't get me wrong. I was also equally an open heart nurse CRNA for 4.5 years. So I love the CV ICU, right? I think it's amazing. But that being said, don't poo-poo your experience if you come from the SICU or MICU or something like that, because those patients have failing hearts too. Like the medical ICU patients are freaking sick, and a lot of them don't get better, so it's like you keep dead people alive. That's what you do. And so anyhow, I just don't poo-poo your experience. I mean, question whether you're in a very high MICU. Don't get me wrong. Some MICUs are not very acute as far as like the acuity is not that great. You have to assess that. Are you dealing with ventilators every day? Are you titrating vasoactive drips every single week that you're at work? Are you dealing with things like CRRT and HFOV and plasma? Like, are your patients coming in having different, like we had cranial bolts even in the medical ICU on occasion. I don't think I saw a lot of swans. I only probably saw like 1 or 2 swans. It just wasn't. We had a pretty high acute cardiac ICU that those would go to. But I mean, we had some really sick patients. I mean, the GI bleeds, the thyroid storms, the cancer everywhere, maxed on every vasopressor kind of patients, a lot of renal failure, a lot of sepsis, a lot of ARDS. Yeah, I mean, no, I'm not comparing whatever I went through to what recent years have come, but back when I was graduating, the H1N1 was like the big deal, right? And there was girls like my age delivering babies in the ICU. I mean, and then stillbirths, and so there were a lot of pregnant girls, a lot of girls that were losing their arms and limbs from necrosis from the H1N1, put them in DIC kind of situation. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like just question your acuity. It doesn't matter whether it's MICU, but if you don't hardly see a ventilated patient and, only on occasion vasopressor, that's not enough. Like you need to see people who are on death's door. Like that's good acuity right there. All right. So, and again, as long as you can prove that through your resume and them quizzing your knowledge when they interview you, you're going to be okay. And that's why, you don't have to have level 1. Let me just say that, right? You don't have to have level 1 either. Like that's also something you hear. You have to have level 1 experience. Level 2 and level 1, by the way, are pretty much very similar in acuity. The biggest difference is level 1 gets the level 1 status because they're more of an educational center who does a lot of research, where typically the level 2s don't. That's not always the case, but I'm just saying, look, if you think of like the blanket statement that you'll see out there, but the acuity is usually very similar. So don't worry if you're a level 2, you're fine. If you don't have any trauma designation, again, same thing. I've seen people come with pretty high acute experiences from non-trauma designated hospitals. but it leaves a lot to be questioned by the faculty who don't know that hospital, right? And I think people assume, oh, but I work so-and-so. They think this name is like known by everyone. Like I remember someone, I forget, they had something like Swedish hospital. And I was like, did they get an ICU experience overseas? Like that's how I thought, like Sweden. Like what? Like I thought, I had no idea it was an actual name of a hospital. But they just like, yeah, you haven't heard? I'm like, no, like that's California or something. I have no idea. I'm in Ohio. Like I have no idea. So keep that in mind just because you think you work at this world-renowned. I mean, maybe if it's like the Mayo Clinic, I think that's pretty world-renowned known. But like, I don't know, there's places in other states that you think is really well known in that state. It's not going to be known somewhere else. Like I mean, maybe these faculty are more accustomed to seeing different hospitals because they see so many applications every year. But don't assume that they're going to know your hospital is high acuity. Make your resume shine. And let me just go off on a soapbox for a second because I've been reviewing a lot of applications. We just launched our CRNA Guarantee program, which I'm so excited about. I've been reviewing a lot of applications and looking at resumes, and I'm shocked, if I'm being perfectly honest, and somewhat sad because the resumes are not doing you justice. Like, please, you guys, look at your resumes. There are some that are just amazing, that are like, wow. Like these programs would be like, oh, I can't wait to like interview this person. And then there are some that are like, oh, really? Like they don't even look like resumes. They're just like paragraphs. I'm like, what's going on? Like, how's this? It's not even a resume. So, and I'm not saying this to be cruel or mean. Please don't take it that way. I just genuinely want to help you. There are a lot of students that I'm going to be like, you need a resume edit. Like you need some major help on this. Like you need to, and then there's equally a lot of, cause I ask other questions on the application. They're not highlighting their committee work. They're not highlighting their precept. They're saying they're precepting, but they didn't put it on their resume, or they're saying they're on a committee, but it's not on their resume. And so it's like, oh my gosh, like you're missing a huge opportunity. And back when I was doing more mock interviews, I noticed that a lot too, where I'd interview them and I'd gather a lot of this really great information from the interview, but then I'd be like, well, it's not even on your resume. Like, why? Like that should be that's your first impression these schools are getting from you is from your resume. So please do yourself a favor and have someone edit your resume. Just look it over. Do a peer-to-peer swap. I'm not saying you have to pay for a resume edit, but do at least a peer-to-peer swap if you can. Nurses teach nurses. There's a lot of help on Nurses Teach Nurses if you want to pay for a resume edit. There are SRNAs who can help you really beef up your resume, make sure you're highlighting all your strengths because, it's just sad to see because I want the best for you and I want these schools to be excited to meet you. And I mean, I'm excited to meet you, but I want to see you shine on your resume. So please be sure to really take your resume to heart. And make sure you do a thorough look over and things like that. All right, so that's enough of that soapbox. Okay, so saving the last two that I discussed for last. Oh, well, actually, there's one more. And then there's three more. Okay, this one is that CRNA school is like drinking from a fire hose. And then if you get behind, you'll fail out. So I know I'm guilty of saying this, because really it does kind of feel like that if I at least in the majority of people that I've talked to do agree, but please see what it feels like for yourself. But I'm just saying it's not that it's not manageable, but if you compare it to the pace that you're used to, meaning what you've dealt with in nursing school, it's going to be incredibly fast. Like that is why I think most describe it as drinking from a fire hose, not because it's doable. It's just not what you're used to. And unless you came from maybe an accelerated nursing program, that kind of thing. The pace is quick. I mean, they have a lot to get through, and the didactic portion of your schoolwork. So you move, and they don't slow down. They don't say, "Oh, we'll go back," and they just keep going. And so, I guess where this also wants to touch on the fact that the reason why, like for me, it felt pretty quick, but I did fine. I didn't have any problems falling that behind. But that being said, you guys, if I had and I really think, I struggled early on in college. I didn't get into college nursing. My GPA wasn't strong enough. I was really faced with that challenge early on in my academic career. And I had always struggled growing up with grades. Like I found out pretty late in my academic career, like in high school late, that I had dyslexia, that I had learning disabilities. And I always knew that because I was put in tutoring and IQ testing and like the slow remedial classes, all that jazz, all that stuff. I always felt really hindered, and I literally believed I was just stupid. It's just awful. I laugh now because I can, but like back then it hurt, right? It really hurt. So all that being said, I was kind of it was smack dab in my face. Like I was like sucker punched my freshman year in college when I didn't get into nursing because my GPA wasn't high enough. And I was like, I just felt like a huge failure. I felt like, oh my gosh, like I'm never going to survive. I'm never going to be successful. I'm doomed. And it was like that really pivotal point in my life, which I'm so grateful for that I experienced it when I did, because it really saved me later on when I advanced my career for CRNA school. But essentially what it forced me to do back then when I was like, 19 years old, is I had to figure it out. I said, I'm going to do this. I'll be damned if anyone's going to tell me no, kind of thing. Like I was like, watch me, I'm going to figure it out. And I've kind of always adapted that mentality, was like, I may not be successful and this may not work, but you better believe I'm going to come back and I'm going to do it again and again and again and more. And I'm going to keep trying to figure out how to do it differently and better until I am successful. And that was kind of the mentality that I adopted back then. And I strive for straight A's for the first time in my entire life. I said, I got to figure out how to get straight A's. I knew that was the only way to get my GPA up high enough to even be considered for the College of Nursing at this university. And I didn't want to leave. The love of my life was there. I'm now married to my husband, but he was there. I met him my freshman year. I had such great girlfriends who I'm still friends with till this day. I had my life there. I had my life at this college. And I'm like, I'm not leaving. I'm not giving up. I'm not just walking home with my tail between my legs. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to get straight A's. I'm going to get into College of Nursing, and I'm going to become a freaking nurse, dang it. And I did. And I got straight A's for the first time. And I remember I still almost get choked up when I think about it, because I just bawled my eyes out when I got that report card and saw that I had done that for the first time in my entire life. And I guess what I'm kind of getting at by this is, if you don't address your study techniques and how you learn, because you can, doesn't mean it's going to be the same as your roommate or your friend or whoever. You can do anything you want. It's just a matter of adapting to what's best for you. And I guarantee you can learn anything as long as your style and technique is effective. And it does mean it's going to take some trial and error. It does mean you might fail. It does mean it's not going to feel easy. It's going to feel really hard. In fact, learning that's effective actually does not feel easy. It's going to feel like you stink. It's going to feel like, man, I just can't get this. But because you're trying so hard, that effort is what produces the learning. It's the active recall, the pain in your brain that you're like, I just got to freaking remember that. That triggers like this like burst of like, I don't know, neurons, whatever, saying, pull that information out of this file in that brain. And that painful effort that it takes to try to recall and relate the information to something else is what builds the ability for you to be a successful learner. And if you don't address this prior to starting CRNA school, it will feel like a fire hose, but if you address your learning style prior to starting, and I know some of you are like, well, what am I going to do now, Jenny? I'm not even in school anymore. Take a graduate level course. A lot of times it's never a bad idea to do before you start CRNA school anyways, to boost your GPA, for example. I'm not saying if you're a 4.0, you should just take a class to take a class, but if you have to take a class anyways, challenge yourself with that class. Get an A. You do not want to take a course before CRNA school and not get an A. So challenge yourself in that class. Go overboard, go crazy, try different study techniques, challenge yourself. I literally, back then it was 2005. It was so long ago. But I Googled everything I could possibly find on study techniques, and I tried them all. I took an entire college course that summer. I just took courses all that summer. And I just made it my goal to figure out how to get A's. And I went to, I lived in the TA office. It was probably like hated me. But I was at the TA office hours, asked tons of questions, sat in the front row. I was like the really annoying kid. Not because I became like super like obsessed. I was like, I have to figure this out. And it means I have to be that student who's going to be like gung ho. And so that's kind of what I did. And I definitely backed off. I wouldn't say I'm the kind of student who's always gung ho now. I don't always sit in the front of the room, that kind of thing. But it really forced me to get a grip on how I learned. And so again, biggest piece of advice I can have to give you before you start CRNA school is know that the pace is going to be something that you probably haven't experienced before, that it's doable. It's fun. It's fun information. And I think that's kind of the way I saw it too. It was like, this is really cool stuff you're learning. It's a lot of fun. It's just a lot of work. And that's okay. Work is good. You work hard, but it's rewarding and enjoyable. So I think the mindset around what you're doing can really help, because if you're doing something you're scared of or that you feel kind of not confident with, it's going to actually feel more painful than if you're like, this is exciting. I'm becoming a CRNA. I'm learning how to be a CRNA. Let's do it. And it just allows you to feel differently about what you're doing, and it allows you to kind of push through the hard times. So anyhow, okay. So the last few that I want to address: if you go into CRNA school in a dysfunctional relationship, if you're already struggling, if you've already cheated, if you're already struggling, and I'm just putting it out there, you guys, what are the odds that it's going to happen again? If you're already dealing with a lot of dysfunction, putting stress, it's like putting fuel on a fire. You're going to be dumping gasoline on that fire. So my biggest piece of advice to you is, if you're having relationship problems before school, you have to deal with it. Counseling, you got to get through it. You got to handle it face on, because it won't get better. The only people I knew in school who actually had issues went into school with a bad relationship. Those are the ones who broke up. Those are the ones who cheated. Those are the ones who got divorced, or the ones who already had problems. The ones who did not have problems all made it out perfectly fine, including all my girlfriends. In fact, one of my classmates married a classmate. How cool is that? So they met their love of their life in CRNA school and got married after school. So beauty does happen in CRNA school, even in the realm of stress. But if you already have problems, it's just not going to get better. It's like, again, you're putting gasoline on a fire. It's going to explode, right? So that's as simple as that. Just because your friend, or someone, not your friend, but someone you know, got a divorce in CRNA school, maybe you don't know the whole backstory. Chances are you don't know what they started with and what their relationship was like prior to going to school. I mean, I've heard some pretty somewhat alarming things. I've heard students, come out and say, I'm scared because my partner's not really supportive. They still want me to do all these things, and they don't want to help me pay for anything. And I'm like, but you're married? Ooh, that's kind of scary. I thought when you marry, it's like, my blood's your blood, baby. You hemorrhage, I hemorrhage. That's just the way it goes. But again, not all relationships are like that. And I think being respectful of everyone's different and unique, and you're going in with different unique circumstances, that's just something you have to address head on. And, I really think the relationships, again, that struggle the most are the ones who don't go into it with a good understanding is one thing. The expectations are not set with, your time constraints and what you're going to probably be saying no to more often and things like that. People take those things personally. If your significant others used to seeing you every weekend and spending that time with you and doing all these things and you spoiling them by, I don't know, maybe you make them lunch every day. I don't know. But hey, what about making me lunch and maybe I have to say no to you? They start taking that stuff personally, right? People are just naturally inclined to say, oh, it must be me. I must not be enough for them anymore. They're going to go off and they're going to meet a doctor and they're going to marry a doctor. I mean, if you're going with jealousy, that needs to be addressed, right? I mean, it's where's that coming from, right? That's what needs to be addressed prior to starting school. So that's my advice for you for relationships. You're not going to get a divorce. It'll be okay. I also want to frame it if you're going to get divorced in CRNA school, more than likely it probably would have happened at some point in your relationship anyways. It just depends on what the stressor is. What if it happened after you had kids and you're then the gasoline was poured after you have kids? Because trust me, kids do that too. Kids will pour gasoline on a fire because they're stressful. And so it just goes to show that stressful things in life, no matter what they are, whether it's CRNA school, having kids, dealing with a sick parent, whatever it is, it pours gasoline on a situation. And if the situation is already out of control and not being fixed or nurtured or addressed, it's probably not going to get better. So it's not CRNA school's fault, but and I'm not saying it's anyone's fault, so don't take it that way, but it's just a stressor. That's all CRNA school is. It's not it's the stressor. It's just a stressor. And so if you look at it like that, you're going to have multiple stressors throughout your life, and this is just going to be one of them. So that's my advice for that. The last thing, and the most important thing that I want to address today, and I've already gone kind of long in this episode, so I do apologize. Thank you for staying with me, is that someone said they heard a CRNA influencer told them, and I probably shouldn't have said that part because I don't know who it was. I don't know. I don't care. It doesn't matter. But I just want to address this, is that most CRNA students have serious thoughts of suicide while in school. First, that is really unfortunate. That person is projecting that onto other people. That is very detrimental and very unfortunate and should not ever be done. But that being said, that's what it is. It's projection. Just like, oh, you're going to get divorced in CRNA school. That's projection. Because you had an experience and you think everyone else is going to experience the same thing, you're like, oh, you shouldn't do that. Just like, remember how I said the whole masking incident? That was scary. My one experience made me fearful of ever doing it again because it was terrifying. And it was one of those situations where I was like, it doesn't mean masking itself was bad. It just means that I shouldn't have tried to mask a morbidly obese teenager, right? So masking in general is not bad, but it was a situation I didn't think through clearly enough. But this is like me saying you should never mask again, like never be done. Everyone's going to get divorced. You're going to have these thoughts of suicide like that that's called projection. And you have to be really good about being like, whoa, look, I'm sorry that you felt that way and that you struggled during school. But I just, and I also want to share another story with you guys that when I was getting ready to graduate, and I've shared this story before, and again, this didn't come from a place of this person wanting to do harm to me. It just came from projection of their own experience and making it such that they thought I should be warned this is going to be my experience because it was theirs. They told me on my very last week of clinical that I'm going to be miserable as a CRNA, that I'm going to hate my life for the first 6 months. I went home in tears. I was like, you know how hard I have worked to get here? I graduate next week. Like, I felt like she punched me in the stomach. Like, I was like, whoa, and twisted it right on the way in. Like, I was just like, that was harsh to hear. And it got me in a really negative mind space until I was like, you know what? Dang you. Like, that's not going to be my experience. And how dare you project your own onto me? I'm going to love being a CRNA. I'm going to be happy. I'm going to join my open heart team. I'm going to enjoy my life. And that's what I did. I got to join an open heart team. I didn't say the first 6 months were not miserable. I will say it was stressful the first few months, just kind of being on my own, being like, oh, wow, okay. Like, I guess I'm on my own. Like, it was just, and honestly, I kind of thought it was kind of rewarding and fun because I knew I had earned it. And I equally knew I had worked really hard to get where I was, and I never felt alone. I always had resources, right? So it was one of those things I always reminded myself, it's okay. You have resources. You have coworkers you can ask questions. You have attendings you can call in the room. Like, it's going to be okay. Call my coworkers in the room, whoever I'm calling in the room. Like, you're not alone. Like, you're never alone. You have your surgeons, you have your circulator. So I guess with this statement, with trying to project something like as serious as suicide onto someone else, it's just very detrimental. So please, I don't know where this is coming from, and I sure hope this is not on a big scale. I really, really hope not. But this is toxic, and you need to recognize that and be very, very careful with how you proceed. And just like the whole marriage thing, you need to address where you stand mentally before you head into school. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that I was magically, blissfully in butterflies and rainbows mentally during CRNA school. It was very challenging. And I'm also someone who struggles with anxiety. I wouldn't say I ever had depression, except I did deal with postpartum depression pretty significantly with our last one anyways. But it was one of those things where I recognized it. I'm like, man, I don't feel like myself. Like, I knew something was wrong, right? Like, I was like, I don't usually feel this way. And I got help. I got therapy, medication. You guys, you have to acknowledge your feelings. And I know I've gone on the podcast and I've said this before, but like, the reason this stuff festers and can get really dangerous and scary is because it doesn't get addressed. You're afraid or embarrassed or insecure or don't feel like you have someone to turn to and talk to this. Identify that person now. Before you start school, identify what would you do on your worst day. If you had one of the worst days you could possibly have in CRNA school, what would that look like and what would you do? Come up with a plan now. I mean, I know as heck I'd snuggle my dogs. The best thing is stick my face right in their neck and snuggle the heck out of my dogs. And then they lick me and they smack me with their tail and knock me over. And then I laugh and yeah, get muzzled by your dogs. Like for me, if I'm having a bad day, that's what I do. I give my kids a hug. And, it's funny, like when I have bad days when I'm choked up, I'm emotional. I tell my kids to come give me a hug. And that's how I feel better, by getting a hug from my kids and talking to my spouse and, calling my mom, like my mom. I know I still call my mom. I'm always going to be her little girl. So just have a plan of who you feel comfortable reaching out to on your worst day. because that's what you need. You need to have a game plan. And if you start finding yourself struggling and having thoughts that are not like you have to reach out. You have to reach out, and not just to like your mom or your husband or anyone, like professionally. Get therapy, go see your doctor, get on an antidepressant, take an anti-anxiety medication. And as I spoke to, I dealt a lot with insomnia and anxiety in CRNA school. And it did feel like a constant kind of like struggle where I had to try to keep that in check. And it never really felt like it got better until after school. And I did take drugs and I did try all kinds of things. But to be honest with you, even after CRNA school, I still had issues with that stuff and I still had to figure it out. And probably now I'm in my mid-30s. I'm just now to the point in my life, you guys, where I'd say my anxiety is, for the most part, very under control. Insomnia, same thing, but I don't know if it's hormonal. I think it's hormonal. Just think you have kids and then boom, your body switches and then all of a sudden you can sleep and you're like, wow. Or I'm just so sleep deprived that when I sleep, I just pass out. I don't know. But all that being said, your life is going to be like this. If you're on the podcast, I'm doing like a roller coaster ride. You're going to go through ups and downs, and you have to make sure when you're in your lowest points, your peaks and troughs of your life, that you have a game plan and that you can recognize when you're feeling not like yourself and getting the appropriate help, okay? And never being shameful or fearful of that, because everyone will experience this. You are not alone. You will never be alone. I can't tell you how many times, like when I share the fact that I had postpartum depression, or I'll never forget this, because I confided in like someone who actually works for CRNA School Prep Academy. She's amazing. She's been with us from day one. But I mean, she's like my coworker. I'm like her boss, and I confided in her that I didn't feel like myself, that I shared with her that I felt like I was dealing with this, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I did too." And then we started having these conversations. She's a mom, I'm a mom, and it was so comforting and reassuring that I think that I was right, that I was like, something is wrong and I need to address this. And so don't be afraid to confide in people that are around you, because you may be surprised. They may have equally struggled with things like that, and they can really be a great support. All right, so that's what I want to leave you with today on this episode. I hope see you guys next week, and cheers to your future. I'm rooting for you. All right, until next week, bye-bye.
Hey, future CRNA, as always, I appreciate you and your loyalty. Thank you so very much for tuning in this week. I'd love to hear from you, so screenshot this episode and share it to your IG stories with your biggest takeaway. Don't forget to tag me at CRNA School Prep Academy so I can personally thank you. Be sure to head over to CRNASchoolPrepAcademy.com to check out our blog and gather free resources to help you along your CRNA journey. Stay strong, and I'll see you next week.